Hello, beautiful calm babes. Welcome to a new episode. I'm here with Natalie, who has just come out with a book called Behind Closed Doors. Dun, 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 dun. And the book is about sex education. And it's a really good book, very, very accessible. We're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about sex education. And I'm also going to do a beautiful, beautiful look on Natalie, as you can see here. Very nice lover, blurry. It's like a burgundy look inspired by a YouTuber called Jessica Vu, and I'm gonna link to the video down there because she probably does a better job at me. But you know, I think I did pretty well.
It's brilliant.
Yeah. So we're gonna hop on and yeah, enjoy the episode. Let's go. So I'm going to start off with the eyes.
Cool.
We're gonna do the lover look.
Great.
And the lover look is pretty simple. What you want to do is create like a sort of blurry effect. So all nice and soft and like, you know, the more you blend it out, the better it is.
Cool.
So in terms of doing the eyebrows, but yeah, you wrote a book.
I did write a book.
How does that feel?
It feels very surreal to have it done in print now.
Oh my god, yeah. Can you show it?
Yeah, so this is my book. Behind Closed Doors, Sex Education Transformed.
So I'm guessing it's about sex education.
It is about sex education.
What inspired you to write that book, actually? I want to know before we get into the bigger topic.
So, I mean, I guess primarily to get the message out there and to spread the conversation about sex education. I'd always been a feminist. I'd always thought about these issues. But it wasn't until I had a kind of, I mean, I won't go into it too much, but I had a kind of experience of non-consent with someone that I knew, and I just felt like I didn't have the tools or the language to really think about it and really understand what had happened or even talk about it. And I felt as well that people around me didn't really have the tools to talk about it. And it was happening at the same time as Me Too.
Yeah, the big campaign against sexual harassment, against lack of consent, against all of the, was it big celebrities that just kind of like trickled down into thousands and thousands of cases of sexual harassment and non-consent that were, you know, like divulged on social media at the same time. Is that it?
That's it, yeah. And I think, you know, we've always, I mean, most women and most people have always known how much sexual violence takes place. But I think it took something like this to really, it was like an outpouring. It was like a, you know.
All right, I'm gonna put some concealer on your eyelids, and then I'm gonna put a bit of powder over it so that the eyeshadow sticks to it.
Jesus Christ.
Your book is about sexual education.
Yeah.
But it's also, well, it's like a, well, I mean, that's why I really adore it. It's like a very large, almost societal analysis of like what sex is today and what it's been previously, or like the history of it, basically, like how we've arrived to understanding sex the way that we do. So not just in terms of sexual relations, but of gender and of, you know, what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, what it means to have a sex, and what social and biological like realities we've constructed for ourselves, which is a very different way from how we're taught sexual education today, right? But that's like your starting point, sexual education today. Yeah,
so what I wanted to do was try and structure the book almost as if it was like a traditional sex education book, if you receive that at all. So usually when you're in like primary school, it would be seen as the most age appropriate to start with like the body. So it'd be like anatomy, so you'd learn about what would happen to you going through puberty.
Yeah.
You'd learn about, you know, then as you got a bit older, you'd learn about procreation. And then as you got even older, and this again is all depending on whether or not you even have a sex education at all. You'd start hopefully learning about like relationships, healthy relationships, abusive relationships. So what I wanted to do was start, structure the book like that. So have the body first, sex in the middle, and then end with relationships and love and desire.
I didn't even notice that. That's pretty clever. What is sex ed like in the UK?
I mean, it's so loose. It like really depends on what school you go to, what part of the country you're from.
So it's not like a statewide thing?
It hasn't been, but it will be from next year.
Ah, so, yes, the big changes.
The big changes. So it's the first time in 18 years that the government has brought in any new legislation on sex education. So as things stand, there's nothing on consent, there's nothing on porn, there's nothing on the internet. Basically, the sex education that they would get now is what I would have when I was younger.
But like sex has changed so much.
Yeah, it constantly changes.
Like you say in your book, you know, sex has changed so much. So what's the current one like then? Like in terms of, you know, the things, how can we critique the current one?
The one that's coming in, or the one that's about...
The one that's been the same for 18 years.
Well, I think it's very sex negative. It's all about fear and prevention. The legislation which came in was influenced and put in place by huge fear-mongering around like the spread of HIV and also around teen pregnancies, and both of which in the media were hugely degrading of like working class women and families in the case of teen pregnancies in the 90s, and then in the 80s of kind of scaremongering around what was seen as so-called creeping homosexuality. So if you think about a lot of these changes to the sex education curriculum have come from a place of
fear,
yeah, and control,
yeah,
domination.
And it's always been the case, right? That's what you say in your book.
Yeah.
Sex education has always been, it's always only been implemented in times where there was seen as like a sort of crisis in sexuality, right? So you talk about the First and the Second World War and about how there was like a massive spread of
STIs, yeah,
STIs, and how sex education came out of like the fear that STIs would propagate, and like, but yeah, it was also very mixed in with eugenics, as you said, with incredibly racist, sexist, like institutions and projects. And the fact that it's changing today, then, do you think it's going to go in the same direction now, or is it going to be, is it like motivated by the same things, or why is it changing now, basically?
I mean, I think it's got to be to do with like technology. I think it's got to do with like porn, it's got to do with Me Too. I think, you know, it's also important to remember like the campaigners who have done like a lot. Like it's going to be far more LGBTQ plus inclusive. It's going to have consent on the curriculum. So even though like, you know, sex education reflects the politics of the time, there is still like some fantastic campaign work. You know, I don't want to undermine.
No, definitely. So, on her eyelids, what I did was I took a transition shade on the top of her eyelids, or on the top of mine as well, and I applied a warm brown, not too dark, like pretty light brown, very, very lightly on the top of her eyelids. Then I moved on with a bit of burgundy, which is like the most popping color on there, and I put it on the sides of her eyelids, but again, like very, very soft, blurred out. You don't need to put that much in, especially with the concealer on top, it's gonna show much more. Then eyeliner or like crayon effect with a more tight brush with a sort of dark brownish copper that I put on the base of her eyelids, and then blurred out on the sides, so not too blurred out, but just like on the top, basically around here. Close your eyes. And then at the end I put a bit of copper on the sides here. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna move on to the face before I do the bottom of the eyes, which will be like the same basic pattern. But before we do that, we're gonna do color correcting under the eyelids. Bam.
Sex education doesn't just come from school.
Yeah.
That's really important to remember.
Yeah.
So where did you learn about
sex
and relationships and...
Geez, that's a bit of a hard one, because I guess it's like a variety of things. Obviously watching porn, one of the big ones. Well, I came into it quite late, but watching porn, especially with like sexual pleasure, I think watching porn has been one of the big ones. Obviously, like, just, you know, sex with different partners, for better or worse, to be honest, but sex with partners has been big. Nothing, I wouldn't say I learned from it, but I definitely, like, got given a lot of ideas about sex from my parents, because they've always been, in their youth, probably quite, like, free-spirited, both of them. And my mother still is, but my dad is very, like, very now patriarchal and protective. And yeah, sex has always been for them, like, something to be feared for women. Yeah, there's always, like, this weird aura of mystery around sex, which is, it's pretty bad.
Yeah.
But no one knows
the shame.
why.
The shame that we
a
just
lot of
get,
shame.
yeah.
And that prevents us from, I mean, obviously, like, anyone who's experienced this knows that, you know, the main way that abusers get away with it is because the survivor's, like, too ashamed to talk about it, you know, because the shame is projected onto them. But there's also, like, some larger societal shame, which is if you talk about sex, then you're inciting people into it, you know? And you're inciting people into, like, an act of, I don't know, debauchery and dangerousness and violence that's, like, never seems to be very age appropriate ever. But yeah, that was my little rant. But you, tell me about you.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, kind of releasing the, like, debauchery. Like, some of the first global sex education programs, I write about this in the book as well, came from the church, which after, you know, European colonizers went around the world and conquered, you know, the vast majority of the globe, the church would kind of follow quite closely behind them, because colonialism wasn't just about, you know, land grabbing and resource extraction. It was also about changing minds, and it was about imposing a new ideology. And one of the first things the church wanted to tackle was, you know, diversion, or what they would call kind of, you know, debased sexuality and sexual practices.
In people considered primitive. Right,
exactly. You know, they implemented, like, anti-sodomy laws. You know, it's like they imposed a very rigid, heteronormative understanding of sex and relationships, kind of centered on the cis heterosexual married couple.
Binary,
you know, one way of living, one way of being happy. Sex on Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Thursdays, never on Sundays. It's interesting that you said you learned about, you know, your own pleasure from watching porn, because a lot of people would say porn is about male pleasure.
Yeah, it is. I mean, like, yeah, I mean, it absolutely is. Yeah. It absolutely is. There are new types of porn that are emerging now, but I don't really trust it, because the industry itself is incredibly exploitative, and I don't want to say, like, you know, I don't want to be one of the people that are like, ban porn, because I don't think that it should be banned. I think that it should be unionized, and that, like, workers' power should be stronger. And I think that the fact that the industry is so precarious is, like, very directly linked to the fact that it's pleasure is centered around male pleasure.
It's complicated. It was, like, the hardest chapter to write.
Really?
Yeah, agonised over it.
Why?
Well, it's just, you know, it's like, it's something that everyone does, and it's something that we don't talk about. And it's also, for most young people, because in the book I interviewed hundreds of young people, and have got their kind of testimonies weaving through, which I thought...
We're going to talk about that in a sec. We're going to talk about that.
And every single one of them would be like, where did you learn about sex? They'd be like, oh, porn. Obviously I learned about sex from porn.
Yeah.
And, you know, you don't want to be porn shaming. And you want to, as you've said, like, centre the workers' rights and centre the people who are in the industry. But we do also need to have a conversation about the way that sex is represented in porn. So it's quite a nuanced, it's quite a fine kind of balance, I think, to get between them.
Obviously, like the pornography industry is something that we want to see being more helpful for what we think sexuality should be, right? Yeah.
And, you know, empowering and reflect the huge variety of human sexuality.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the problem when it's so commercialized and it's so dominated by kind of few, you know, it's monopolized basically. And it means that there's, you know, as we know, kind of one or two, move me. And that teaches people that there's only one way to be sexual.
Whereas what we want to show is that there's a multiplicity of ways.
Yeah.
And certain rules and regulations that like confine these multiplicities, like consent, but multiplicity nonetheless. Right, now we're going to put on the volume mascara.
Whoa. So what do they do?
There's one
I didn't even know there were 2 types.
Oh, there's like 5 types of mascara.
What?
There's one that extends lashes, one that gives volume, one that is waterproof so it keeps the curl on. So if your lashes are like really straight, definitely use waterproof mascara. There's one that curls the lashes. There's one that darkens them. I feel like there's more than 5 actually. So I'm gonna do a blurry lip look, which I think goes so well with this makeup. It's again like very soft, not very pronounced, and the trick is to have a more concentrated amount of lipstick at the center, and then like the more you get to the sides, the more you blur it out. So you blur it out with your hands. So I'm going to use 2 different types of lipstick. The first is very watery based to just apply over the whole lip, and then I'm going to use a more concentrated one, but the same color, like reds, to apply. Alright, look and see if you like the lips.
Whoa, they're so cool! So cool! I love the lip. I think the lip's my favourite bit actually.
Yes! So, what would a perfect sex ed program look like for you?
I think it's got to be very fed in by, so we're talking about schools.
Yeah.
I think it's got to be very led by the young people. So as we've spoken about, what is this?
It's a setting spray.
Okay.
I'm gonna tag you.
Pepper spray. Yes, I think it's got to be very led by the young people and what they feel like they need to know. I think that's how you get around this question of like age appropriateness as well. It's when the young people start asking questions, it's when they want to know certain things, that you empower them with that information. So
the young people that you've interviewed, because you interviewed like hundreds of them, how did they describe the sex ed that they wanted? I
really wanted like an honest, frank conversation that's kind of free of embarrassment and shame. And I think it can be tricky. I mean, what a lot of them would say, it would be tricky when it's your teacher doing it, because you know, you'd have this space where you're expected to open up about some like potentially really private things, and teachers can do techniques like have a kind of box at the front of the classroom where you can put anonymous questions in. Often that would lead to like kind of jokes and like stupid things, but like there are ways you can get around like this question of privacy and intimacy. But then you'd be expected to go and have like a maths lesson from them, or like a physics class or a chemistry class. So what a lot of them wanted would be like someone external to come in to talk about it. But that requires huge injection of resources and cash, which, as we know, the school system has been stripped away from the funding that would be required to have this kind of like education program, I think. And also rethinking of the way we understand education. Like it doesn't have to be this hierarchical thing that the teacher comes in and they teach the students what they need to learn in life, but it can be far more inclusive, far more participatory and led by the young people. Because I think it's safe to assume like as soon as you buy your child a smartphone, or they get their hands on a smartphone, they will be watching porn, they will be Googling this stuff. So it's really important that there's another space where they can learn about healthy relationships and learn about the nuances involved in sex and how pleasurable it can be, but how it can also be problematic. And
Yeah,
abusive,
and how it's attached to sexism and colonialism and the like the entire history of like what it means to like live in a world where sex is binary, for instance.
Yeah.
Or, you know, it's as you said, it's much deeper than just well, the act of sex. Like there's so much behind it. There's like entire identities and like identities of societies that are at stake. There's like, you know, domination and repression and like genocidal violence also.
Yeah.
Linked behind the fact that you're going to be masturbating. It's great. I think that concludes both the conversation, well not ever the conversation, but the look definitely. Because it's a very, very beautiful look that we have here. Do you want to come closer? The Lover look, inspired by Jessica Vu. On YouTube. Definitely I'll link to her channel because she probably does a better job at me, but I still think I did a pretty good job.
Great.
Yeah.
I love the lips in particular. They're so
the
pretty.
lips are my favorite. I always it's like it's very like South Korean like signature lip style, you know, to make the lips look bigger as well. And yeah, I really like it. But yeah, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much. It's been, I feel very pretty to go out and do something fun.
Yay! That's what we want. But yeah, thank you so much for coming to talk about sex ed with me.
Cool.
I hope that everyone here enjoys it, and yeah, go buy Natalie's book. Go buy Natalie's book. Go buy Natalie's book. Go. It's a great book. I really enjoyed it, and it's really accessible. And
yeah, we didn't talk about that, but yeah,
it is
it's
really
accessible. Yeah,
yeah.
I've tried. Yeah,
you tried to make it for any audience. You know, it's not like a very like jargony book.
Yeah.
Anyone can read it, and it's literally about like everything that's been going on in the news. So yeah, have a look. All right, I think it's time to say goodbye.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Bye, come babes.